Okay friends, one of the first things we have to do to get started is to disconnect our negative battery terminal. Set that aside so it's not making any contact with the battery. We're going to continue on by removing our clamps that hold the hoses to the filler neck itself. I like to spray everything down with a good amount of penetrant. Now we're going to continue with a 1/4 inch ratchet and an 8mm socket and start loosening this clamp. The first hose I'm going to take off is this one right here. That way there it's out of the way so I can remove the next clamp. Okay, that's nice and loose. Let's go ahead and slide it out of the way. Now let's continue with this right here. We're going to get in between the filler neck and the hose itself and just try to separate the two. I want to be very careful not to damage the hose that leads down to the fuel tank. Okay, so now that we went ahead and broke this one free, let's continue on to removing the larger one now. Just going to do the same thing, loosen up the clamp, and then of course we'll get around it with that pick and break it free. I'm just going to use my pry bar, come right up in between the frame area here. Be careful for any brake lines you might have. And let's just try to separate the filler neck from those hoses. So now that we have the hoses off, let's go ahead and climb underneath the driver's side of the truck. Your fuel tank's going to be located right here, but there's also a metal shield that's going to be in the way to remove the fuel tank. So the first thing that we need to do is go ahead and get this shield out of here. You're going to notice that you have a mounting bolt that comes through from the outer portion of the frame, coming through to here. We're going to come right up here and remove this one as well. Then we'll come right down here, remove this, and then up here, and we'll remove those two nuts and bolts as well. There's one. Now we're going to remove these two bolts right here. You're going to notice that you're going to have to hold the nuts on the forward side, and then we'll remove the bolt from the rearward side. There's one. Let's do the same to the other. Now let's hold off on removing this nut right here, and we're going to move over towards the driver's side and remove these two mounting bolts as well. Now let's move back over towards the front of the tank. I'm just going to go ahead and grab onto this. Give it a nice little wiggle so that it clears this wiring area here. If yours doesn't wiggle, you can go ahead and try to loosen this a little bit. Now we're going to move over here and remove this nut. Just keep in mind, this is pretty much the only thing holding up the shield, so once we remove it, you're going to have the entire weight of the shield coming down. Now we're just going to put something underneath the center of the fuel tank so we can support it, and of course we also are going to need to be able to lower this down after we've removed the mounting hardware. Let's start with the rearward bolt right here. That bolt's out. Let's go ahead and bend this down and out of the way. Now let's move along to the driver's side outside frame. You're going to find that there's 4 bolts. 1, 2, 3. And the other one's going to be hidden right behind here. So this one's going to be the last one that we remove. Let's remove the first 3. The next thing I want to do is go ahead and get this EBrake cable right out of the way. Essentially, I'm just going to go ahead and squeeze on the tabs that are holding it into this bracket and then pull it so it gets to the point where it's here. And then we can move it out of the way so we can get the bolt out. I'm just going to use a tool that looks like this. It's going to go right over. You can also use pliers if you can get it around all the ears. There we are. Now we'll just pull this out of the way, and now we have complete access to that bolt. Now we're just going to come underneath here, and we're going to try to pull this bracket away from the area of the frame so that way there we can remove the fuel tank. Where am I going to go? ahead and carefully start lowering it down. All right, so now with the fuel tank as low as we can go, we have it at an angle. The reason for that is because I want to start removing all these fuel hoses, and then we're going to move along to removing the electrical connector as well. Now for 2 of these fuel hoses, what you're going to realize is you're going to have 2 little squeeze tabs. You go ahead and squeeze on them, it's going to release the line. Just be careful because there is probably fuel inside the lines. Just going to squeeze right here and here, give this a nice wiggle, and draw it off. This one right here in the center is going to be a little bit different, so we're going to save that one for last. I'll just continue on by removing this other one right here. There we are. We've got some fuel coming out. Now for this one, it's got different types of squeeze tabs. It's basically just these little circular rings off to the sides. If you were to just go ahead and squeeze on those, it's going to separate the tabs, and then you can draw this off as well. All right, that one's off as well. Let's move along to the electrical connector. Okay, so now the next thing we're going to do is remove our electrical connector. You're going to notice up along the rearward side, or along the driver's side of it, I should say, there's going to be a gray locking device. Essentially, it's just a piece of plastic. I'm going to come in between the center, try to push down, and then try to pry that gray locking tab away. There we are. Now let's go ahead and squeeze on this center tab, and then draw the electrical connector away from the fuel tank. Perfect. Now that we have the larger one off, let's continue on to the smaller one. This one right here, you can just go ahead and grab onto this tab, lift it up, and then we'll draw it away from the fuel pump. Now with all that disconnected, let's go ahead and carefully lower our fuel tank. We're going to do this slowly because of course we have the hoses that go up and over the frame for the filler neck. Now that we have the fuel tank safely down on the ground, we're going to continue on by spraying off all the debris that's in this localized area. Essentially, the reason for that is because we need to take off this clip, and also because when we remove the fuel pump from the tank, we want to make sure that no debris falls inside. Now let's just take some rags and put them right inside the hole. That's going to help keep the vapors and the liquid inside of the fuel tank. All right, let's go ahead and flip this on its side, and then we're going to start removing the nut for the strap. Okay, go ahead and grab onto that. All right, so now the next thing we want to do, now that we've sprayed this down and let it sit for a little while, is to continue on with a brass punch and a hammer. And I'm just going to work my way around this locking clip here, essentially just breaking it free from the fuel tank. Now I'm just going to use some snap ring pliers. They have the little tips on them, and they're going to fit into the holes for the snap ring. This one kind of came out when I was bonking on it, but essentially if you just put your snap ring plier into the holes and then squeeze on it, we're going to be able to release that locking clip and then remove it from the tank. Let's give this another blast with air. The next thing we're going to do is go ahead and pry the fuel pump up from the fuel tank. Go ahead and carefully lift this up and out of here. It's still going to have fuel in it, so you're going to want to make sure that you dump that into a recycling bin. Now we're going to move along to removing the rubber hoses from the fuel tank. Get the clamps off of here. Now I'm just going to carefully get in between here. Just try to work my way all the way around to try to break the hose free from the fuel tank. Let's do the same to the other one. Now the next thing we're going to do is transfer the fuel from the original fuel tank to our new fuel tank. Now let's go ahead and put our hose onto the brand new tank. Get this lined up, we'll tighten up the clamp. Give it a nice wiggle, make sure it's secured. Let's do the same to the other one. There we are. So now we're going to go ahead and put this in. Let's go ahead and put the float in, and it's going to go towards the rear of the vehicle. As we bring this down, we're going to line up this tab right here. with the area on the fuel tank where it needs to go. And we'll leave it just like this. Next, we're going to take our O-ring, carefully put it up and over this, and then we're just going to gently stretch it over. Now let's go ahead and press this down into where it needs to go. Remember to line up your tab. Now let's grab our clip, just slide it around here. I'm going to line it up, press down on the fuel pump, and we'll start putting our clip around. Last one. Gonna help it in there. There we are. Now just make sure the clip's sitting completely inside all the way around the fuel tank. Let's go ahead and take our clamps. We're just gonna put them right over the hose so we don't have to worry about trying to put them on later. Now the next thing we need to do is take our bracket with the strap. We're gonna carefully lift up on our fuel tank, slide this over, and then it should wanna sit right inside of its groove. Now at this point, we'll just go ahead and grab onto the strap, pull it around, and then line up the stud with its hole. After you get it all lined up, we'll continue on by starting our nut on. The next thing we want to do is just ensure that our strap is fitting perfectly along the tank. You want it to definitely be sitting inside the groove, and of course this needs to be sitting in its groove along the bottom. Once you're sure of that, let's continue on by snugging it up. Let's go ahead and start putting our fuel tank up. Before we put it all the way up though, let's make sure that we connect in our electrical and of course our fuel lines. The larger the electrical connector is going to go towards the front of the truck, the forward connector. Push it in, give it a nice click, and make sure it's secure. Next we're going to go ahead and do the smaller one. That's going to be towards the rear of the fuel pump. Go ahead and slide that in, listen for a click. There it is, give it a nice wiggle, secure as well. Let's go ahead and get the little gray lock for this now. Now on the larger one, let's go ahead and push in our gray lock. Next we're going to start connecting in our fuel lines. We're going to take the larger one, which is the forward one. That's going to go into the forward aspect of the fuel pump right here. Go ahead and push it in, listen for a click, give it a nice tug. You will definitely want to make sure that all of your fuel lines are completely secured. The center one's the one that does not have a clip on it. Let's go ahead and put that in as well. Give it a nice tug. And then of course, last but not least, the rearward line. Give it a nice click and a nice tug. Perfect. Now that we have the upper lines connected, the next thing we want to do is go ahead and jack this up so that our bracket's lined up with the area on the frame that it needs to be. At the same time as we're doing that though, we need to pay attention to the fuel hoses, which are located up on top of the fuel tank. We want to make sure that those hoses line up with our filler neck. Okay, now that I have those holes semi-lined up, let's go ahead and start in a couple of the bolts. Okay, so now that I've got them lined up, let's go ahead and start in all 4 of our bolts before we snug any of them up. Now we're just going to go ahead and tighten up all of our bolts. Now that those are nice and snug, let's go ahead and put in our e-brake cable. Perfect. Now that we tightened up the bolts for the front strap, let's continue on to the rear. I'm just going to bend this right up along here. You can tell that it fits inside the groove of the fuel tank. We're going to bring this right up along this area here. Let's continue on with this piece right here. You can tell that it has a little hooky-doo. That hook's going to go around this right here, and then it should sit up along the top there. So we can take our bolt, slide it right through both of these here, and then we'll line it up with our mounting hole and start in this bolt as well. Now we're just going to torque both straps to 13 foot-pounds. Now we can get the jack out of here. Okay, so now let's go ahead and line up our filler neck with those hoses. If it's hard to get one of them on there, just go ahead and use your little hook. Slide this around the tube. All right, so now that we have those slid on, let's continue on by tightening up both of our clamps. Okay, now it's going to be time to go ahead and get our shield up on there. We've got this bracket here. That needs to go up and over the drive shaft. So I'm just going to go ahead and turn this at an angle, put it up over the drive shaft, and then put the other end over the leaf spring. There we are. I'm just going to go ahead and use a washer and the nut. Start that on here. Okay, so now let's just go ahead and line up our shields so the bolt holes line up with the frame of the truck here. We're going to use our 2 long bolts that look like this. Go ahead and slide them through the shield, through the frame, and then right out the other side. Now with both bolts through, let's go ahead and start on the nuts. So now we're going to come to the front of the tank. We're going to start in the other bolts here as well. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and lift up on this, and then I'm going to take my bolt on my socket with an extension, come through the frame, and start it in. Let's get that bolt in there. Okay. Now let's go ahead and start in our forward bolt. Now let's go ahead and start in our rearward bolts. Okay, so now that we have all of our mounting bolts started on our shield, let's continue on by snugging them all up. All right, let's not forget this one as well. Okay, now back up at the front of the truck, let's go ahead and reconnect our negative battery terminal and snug it up. Give it a nice wiggle, make sure it's secure. Okay friends, now all you have to do is hop in the driver's side of the truck and we're going to take that key and put it in the on position. We're going to listen for the fuel pump. You want to make sure it primes the lines. After that, turn the key to the off position and then back to the on position and start it. After that point, you want to make sure you take a peek underneath the truck and make sure you don't have any fuel leaks. Then, take it for a road test.